The water reached the second floor by supper. That was the last thing about the house that made sense. By full dark, it had climbed the attic stair, and the family was pressed against the roof peak, in a box of black water with a foot of air left in it. There was one door in that attic, and it led down into the flood, toward the street and the solid ground where every instinct told them to go. Her father did not go down. He set his feet on the joist, and he swung the axe up, into the roof over their heads, not at the door, not toward the land, up, into the shingles, letting the storm scream in through the first gap. He was not chopping a way out to the street. He was chopping a way out onto the water. Etta was 10 years old that night, and she would be an old woman before she stopped seeing it. Her father, one arm half dead, opening the roof of their own house from the inside to put his children out into a hurricane on purpose. To understand why a sane man does that, and why it was the only reason any of them saw the morning, you have to go back to that same day. A bright, hot holiday Saturday, September 8th, 1900, Galveston, Texas, a city on a sandbar a few feet above the Gulf of Mexico with no wall between it and the sea. Galveston was a rich city built on a low place, and it had never once been sorry. It stood on a barrier island off the Texas coast, 30-odd thousand people, the busiest port in the state, and at its highest point only a few feet above the Gulf. There was no seawall. There had never seemed to be a need for one. The sea was where the money came from. The sea had always been a neighbor, never yet an enemy. Henry Doyle knew the sea from the other side of that friendship. He was 38, island-born, Irish. Before he took steadier work, hauling cargo off the docks with a horse and cart, he had grown up on the bay. Oysters, a flat-bottomed skiff, the tides twice a day for 20 years. A drayman now, but a bayman first. He read water the way a farmer reads the sky, without deciding to. His daughter Etta was 10, and it is Etta who remembered all of this, and Etta who told it, long after everyone else who could was gone. Her father had a saying he brought up from the skiff, and he had said it to her 100 times, and she had half heard it 100 times. The sea gives its warning in the wrong tide. When the water comes in on a wind that ought to be pushing it out, that is the sea being driven ahead of something. That is the day you go up. His family was Nora, steady and quick, Etta, 10, Sam, 7, and a baby. Their house was a light frame house up on piers, a few blocks in from the bay side of the island. The sheltered side, the safe side, everyone would have told you. And there was Nora's brother Michael, who had just finished a fine, big house of brick and believed, the way a man believes in a thing he has paid for, that it was the safest place on the island. That morning came up bright and strange and breathless. The Gulf surf was running high and beautiful, and half of Galveston walked down to the beach to watch it. Children ran in the foam. It was a holiday of it. The water was already standing in the lowest streets, and the crowd treated that as part of the show. Henry did not go to the Gulf side. He went to the bay side, and there he saw the thing that turned his stomach to water. The bay was rising too. The sea was coming in from the Gulf, which a storm could explain, but the bay, on the sheltered side, was climbing just as fast, and the wind was out of the north, a wind that should have been shoving the bay water away from the island, not piling it on. Both waters were rising to meet in the middle. In the middle of the island was the city. He read it the way he read a tide line. The whole island was a sandbar, and it was about to go under. Michael came around to fetch them to the brick house. High ceilings, thick walls, room for the neighbors. The safe place. Henry told him what the bay was doing. Michael laughed at him, kindly, the way you laugh at a man who has spent too many years alone in a boat. He would not stay, and Henry would not come, and the two families split at the door with the water already at the gate. Then Henry did the opposite of everything his street was doing. The neighbors were nailing their shutters and going indoors and downstairs, into their parlors, to wait it out. The drill everyone knew. Henry brought the axe up from the shed. He put rope where he could reach it. He dressed and fed his children while there was time, and he moved them not toward the cellar, but toward the stairs. His whole plan from that hour was up. By afternoon, the water was in the yard, then on the porch, then over the first step and the second. It was not waves, it was a rising, a tide that had forgotten how to turn. The neighbors still called it high water. They still expected it to peak and fall the way water always had. Henry watched it, and it did not fall, and the not falling was the whole story. He took Etta to the two windows so her hands would remember it 70 years on. Gulfside, water climbing. Bayside, water climbing. The island was not being flooded. A flood drains somewhere. The island was being covered. There was nowhere for this water to drain because it was not rain and it was not river. It was the sea itself arriving from both sides at once. He waded out to the shed and turned the dray horse loose. A tied animal drowns. A loose one swims and takes its own chance. He did not try to hitch the cart and run. The streets were already rivers, and a cart in that was a coffin on wheels. He gave up the road on purpose, while other men were still whipping their teams into it. Across the way, a family went out into the current on foot, chest deep, a chain of them holding hands, making for a bigger house down the block. The water took the smallest of them off his feet before they reached the corner. They caught him back that time. Not everyone on the island that hour was caught back. Then the wind, which had been the smaller thing all day, came in with its full weight. Slates flew off like cards. A chimney went. A porch roof sailed away down the flood entire. And the water began to carry things, planks, fence sections, whole walls, so that now there were two forces working, the water lifting and the wind smashing, and the wreckage did both at once. Everything Henry had ever learned said the same thing: get to higher, stronger ground while you still can. And everything he had learned about this particular water said the opposite louder. He would not put 3 children into a chest-deep current to run for a better house. He would not take them into Michael's brick either. He barred the whole idea of leaving. He carried food and rope and the baby up to the second floor, and he kept climbing the plan in his head, toward the attic, toward the roof. Nora wanted her brother's house. She could feel it out there in the dark, high and dry and full of people, the strong place, and every fear in her pulled toward it. Henry would not take his children into a masonry building with a surge coming. A frame house could float. Brick only fell. They gained the second floor as the first floor went under, the water swallowing the parlor, the stairs, the whole downstairs life of the house, while the 5 of them stood dry one level up with an axe and a coil of rope. It was a small win, and it was whole. Going up had bought them an hour the flood could not take back. But the water did not stop at the first floor. It found the staircase and began to climb it, step by counted step, toward the second. And above the second floor, there was only the attic. And above the attic, only the roof. And no way yet from the one to the other. On the second floor, by a lamp that would not last, Henry remade his household for water instead of weather. The axe, a coil of rope, the baby's basket, a knife, and the beds, because beds float, and a man plans with what he has. He roped the children to himself and to each other, the lengths measured for the reach of water, not the size of a room. Whatever happened next, they would happen to it together or not at all. Then, across the flood, in the dark and the roar, came a sound that was neither wind nor water. A long, grinding groan, and then a fall. The collapse of a big building somewhere out in the night. The strong houses, the brick and stone ones where whole crowds had gathered to wait it out, were taking the surge and the battering wreckage and going down with the people inside them. Henry did not know that this one was Michael's. He knew only what the sound was and what it meant about walls. He told Etta the second rule then, so her hands would own it. A frame house is a boat that has not floated yet. When the water lifts it off its piers, it will move and roll and break apart. And the only ones who live through that are the ones already on top of it and outside it, not sealed underneath the roof. The plan had a shape now, and the shape was up and out, before the house became a wreck with them locked in it. The water came up the stairs and over the second-floor boards. The beds lifted and knocked against the walls. The lamp drowned with a hiss. Now there was one space left in the house with air in it. The attic, up the ladder stair, under the peak of the roof. The last room, also the most sealed. A box with a lid. In the climb up the ladder, Sam slipped. He went off the rungs into the black water of the room, and Henry went down after him, into floating furniture and dark, and got a fist into the boy's collar and hauled him up. It saved the boy. It also tore something in Henry's shoulder, a deep, wrong give, and from that moment he had one full arm and one that would only half answer, for the rest of a night that would ask everything of both. They got all five into the attic, up onto the joists, above the water for now, in a darkness so complete it pressed on the eyes. Henry checked the rope. He counted the heads with his good hand. The roar of the wind was right there against the shingles, an inch from their faces. And here Henry made the decision the whole night had been walking toward. Every instinct in a flooding attic says, wait. Wait for rescue. Wait for the water to peak. Keep the roof whole and dry over the children as long as there is a board to stand on. He refused it. He would not wait for the water to force his hand, because by then the water would be in his mouth. He would open the family's last shelter now, with his own axe, and let the storm in while there was still a foot of dry air to work in. He braced on the joists, found the weak line of the roof by feel, and set the blade. Somewhere in the dark, Nora understood, without a word from anyone, that the collapse she had heard was her brother's house. There was no time to grieve it and no breath to spare. Henry put the baby into her arms to hold high and gave her a thing to do with her hands, because work was the only bridge that would carry her across the next hour. Then he swung the axe up into the roof, and the wind screamed in through the first gap like something that had been waiting all night to be let in. Rain and black sky where the shingles had been. The attic was not a box anymore. It was a doorway into the storm, which was the plan. He cut the hole one-armed, the bad shoulder failing on every second stroke, Etta holding the rope and Sam holding nothing but on. Behind them, the water climbed the ladder, 2 steps below the attic floor, then 1. Then it was on the attic floor, around their knees on the joists, and Henry cut against the sound of it rising. The race was the water coming up the stair against the hole going out through the roof, and there was no prize for second. He won it by a hand's width. He broke the last of the gap open, and he did the thing the whole story would be named for ever after. He opened the roof from the inside, upward, and he put his family out through it, up onto the wet, pitching slope of their own roof, into the full body of the hurricane. Because the inside of the house was the drowning place now, and the outside, impossible as it felt, was the living one. The wind on that roof tried to peel them off the world. The rain came sideways and hard as thrown gravel. The slope was slick and steep, and below it, all around, the black water ran full of moving houses and tumbling lumber. Henry set his family at the peak, roped low, faces turned down out of the wind, the baby lashed inside Nora's coat against her body. And he watched the water. All night the flood had thrown wreckage at them, and now he taught Etta the third rule by doing it. The same lumber that batters is the lumber that floats. He was not dodging the debris anymore. He was choosing it. He watched the dark rafts go by, roofs, walls, whole floors torn loose and riding the surge, and he waited for the right one, the big one, the one riding high and lashed together by its own nails. Under them, the house lifted off its piers. It was a sick, floating roll, the whole roof turning loose like a raft cut from its mooring. Henry had said it, and now it was true. A floating house does not stay up, and it does not stay whole. Their platform was a sinking boat. Whatever he was going to do, the roof under their feet had put a clock on it. A gust hit, the roof lurched, and something tore away into the dark. A blanket, the baby's empty basket, a thing and not a child. And for one stopped heartbeat, no one in that family knew what the water had just taken.
The baby was there against Nora. The scare was the price. Everything not tied to a living body was already gone. Then his raft came.
A great mat of debris rode down on the wind. A slab of somebody's roof and wall, timber and shingle, bigger and higher and more solid than the rolling wreck they stood on. Henry read it the way he had read the tide all his life. This one, now, or none. And to take it, they would have to leave the roof. To put a whole family off their last solid footing into black water at a moving wreck that might miss or roll or come apart in his hand. He refused the roof. It was the last piece of home, the known thing, the boards under their feet, and he gave it up. He roped the family into one line. He timed the raft's pass against the roll of the dying house, and he put his children off the roof and into the water toward the wreck. Himself last, hauling the line behind them with his one good arm. They made it. They came onto the raft, a piece of some other family's house, timber and shingle riding the flood, and behind them, their own roof rolled under and broke apart in the dark. They were not sheltering from the water anymore. They were on it and going wherever it went. Henry did not try to steer for anywhere. He read where the water wanted to go, across the drowned island toward the far bayside, and he set his family to ride it, low and roped, instead of fighting it. That was the fourth rule, and it was the hardest one to obey, because it looked like doing nothing while you drowned. Off in the dark stood a house, still up, still lit, solid, high, dry, salvation with a lamp in the window. Every nerve said paddle for it. They tried. Henry and Etta worked aboard against the water, hauling the raft toward the light, and the current that owned them took the effort as an insult and nearly rolled the whole raft over for it. So he stopped. He pulled the board in. This was the choice under all the others. He gave up the lit house, the fixed goal, the one target his own eyes kept begging him to reach, and he let the black water carry his family straight past the only light they could see, into a darkness he could not read the end of. He roped them lower to the timbers and turned the raft to take the current instead of crossing it. He gave the flood the wheel. Then came the long hours, which were only endurance. Debris struck the raft out of the dark, and the family took the blows on the timbers and on their own backs. The baby rode high in Nora's coat. Sam and Etta were roped between the two adults, and Henry kept them at the center, kept the small heads up, kept the count of them by touch because there was no breath for names. Nobody spoke. The wind took anything anyone said. Their hands kept wanting to grab at the fixed things that swept past, a tree still standing, a telegraph pole, the top of a wall. Henry stopped their hands every time. Grab a fixed thing in a current like this, he made them understand, and it tears you off the raft and keeps you. Hold the raft. Let the solid world go by. The moving thing was the safe thing now. The solid thing was the killer. Somewhere in the worst of it, his own accusing voice found him. He had carried his family onto the open water, while Michael carried his into a house of brick. And Michael's house was at the bottom of the flood. And until the water went down, who was to say which brother had read it right? Every choice of the night could be renamed as a boatman's arrogance, a stubborn islander gambling his children on a raft. And under it came the oldest thing his father had taught him on the skiff, in water a tenth this size. You cannot beat the sea, and you cannot hide from it. You can only stay on top of it and let it tire before you do. Endure the crossing, ride, and last. Past the middle of the night, the water reached its height, and at last began to ease. The sea that had climbed all day started sliding back off the island toward the gulf it came from. The drift slowed. The raft began to touch things under the black water, grounding, lifting, grounding again on something solid. And here Henry made himself wait one more time. The raft touched, and every muscle in every body screamed to get off it, to stand up, to walk to land at last. But in the dark, he could not see whether it was ground under them or a drowned roof, whether it was shallow or a hole. He would not leave the raft on the word of his eyes. He kept his exhausted family roped to the timbers and read the water going down against a standing post, inch by inch, until he was certain the ground would stay ground. Then, with the surge falling and the east going gray, the raft settled onto real earth and held. Henry got his family off the timbers and onto an island that was barely there, stripped, drowned, wrecked, but there and solid and still. Morning came up gray on an island that had been scraped down to sand. The wind had fallen. The water was draining off into the Gulf and the bay. And where a city of streets and thousands of houses had stood the day before, there was a flat waste of splintered lumber and one vast, unbroken ridge of wreckage piled miles long where the surge had finally stopped and dropped everything it carried. They walked. Henry got his family off the raft and across the wreckage toward where the town had been, and he kept the children's eyes turned from what the ridge of debris held. His bad arm hung useless at his side. His chest whistled from a night of salt and wind, and it would whistle, faintly, for the rest of his life. They walked on ground that was made of everyone's houses. All across the flats, other people were coming off wrecks, and out of the few houses left standing. Many of them, like the Doyles, had ended the night on floating debris, carried across the drowned island in the dark, and set down alive when the water fell. The people who had gathered in the strong brick houses, the safe places, were counted another way that morning. The water had carried the living, the walls had kept the dead. They found Nora's people and the gap in them. Michael's brick house was a heap of its own bricks. Of the many who had sheltered in it, some had lived and some had not, and Michael was among the ones who had not. Nora learned it standing up, with her baby alive on her hip, and nothing was said that the children could hear. What had happened to Galveston, the accounts of the period set down carefully, and it has never been improved on. It was the deadliest natural disaster in the history of the country. One storm, one low island, one night, and by the counts that survive, somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people were gone by morning. Whole families, with no one left behind to write their names. Henry paid for the morning with the working parts of himself. The shoulder never set right. He hauled cargo one-armed the rest of his working life, and called himself lucky, and meant it. The salt night took something from his lungs that every wet winter gave back to him as a reminder. The house was gone to the sea, and the horse, and his wife's brother. He had brought Nora and Etta and Sam and the baby and himself through a night that erased a city, and it cost him pieces of his body he never got back. He had not sheltered from the sea. The ones who sheltered drowned. He had not fled it across the island. The island had nowhere to go. He had lived by going up when the street went down, out when the neighbors stayed in, and on to the open water when every other soul clung to the land, and by riding the flood instead of fighting it, until the sea grew tired before he did. You do not beat the sea. You stay on top of it. Afterward, the city did the only thing left to do. It raised its whole grade with sand, foot by foot, and it built a great seawall against the Gulf, so the sea could never again simply walk across the island in the dark. Henry lived to see the wall go up, and Etta, the girl who was 10, who learned to read the wrong tide from her father on the roof of a drowning house, grew old on that raised and walled island, and told this story to her own grandchildren. It always began the same way, in the one sentence the family wore smooth with telling. The water reached the second floor by supper, and her father cut a hole in the roof.